Good morning, everybody. It is so wonderful to see you all here, to have such a fantastic group of people joining us online. My name is Wendy Smith. I am faculty at the Lerner College of Business and the faculty director of the Women's Leadership Initiative. And I am here joined by my friend, colleague for many, many years, co-author and the dean of the Lindner School of Business at the University of Cincinnati, Marianne Lewis. And we are so thrilled to be back online with you all with this webinar, to be online with you all with this webinar that is being co-sponsored by Lindner, by the Women's Leadership Initiative at UD, or Lindner at University of Cincinnati, the Women's Leadership Initiative at UD, and the Weinberg Center for Corporate Governance at the University of Delaware. It has been such a pleasure to pull these different groups together. I know that Marianne and I love working together as co-authors and colleagues, and it is such a pleasure to pull together our different institutions. Our goal this morning is to explore the idea of both and, the notion of paradox and how it shows up in particular in the context of women and women's leadership and what that means. And in part, this was triggered, inspired, if you will, by the research that Marianne and I have been doing for the last 25 years together, and that has emerged in the book that we just released in August, Both and Thinking, Embracing Creative Tensions to Solve Your Toughest Problems. The two of us have been thinking about this idea of how we, and the big idea of how we move from either or thinking in the competing demands that we experience into both and thinking in the ideas of, and to reframe our tensions to be more generative and creative. And it's certainly, as we experience it, applies deeply to the challenges of women's leadership, something that we both talk a lot about. And so we're excited to have that conversation and speak with the panel here today.
Thank you, Wendy. I just want to reiterate, it's just, I love seeing all the messages and what from everywhere around this country. We may have people even beyond. This is really a pleasure. When Wendy and I both started exploring tensions, what we found is that they're everywhere, that we live and sometimes thrive, sometimes are truly challenged by our greatest tensions, whether it's at an organizational or a really strategic level. Are we focused on the short term and or the long term? Do we think about financial responsibility or social responsibility, inclusion and excellence, to the teams and the projects that we work on a regular basis, to our leadership, or to thinking about how do we lead from the head and the heart, to be courageous and bold, yet vulnerable and compassionate, and really going all the way to the individual, that these are part of our lives. These are part of our existence, from our professional life to our very personal spheres. And that pushed us to think about, so how do we navigate? And we've studied this in a variety of ways. But what we found is that one of the great challenges is that our default is to either or. It's to thinking about with kind of a formal logic. You can see kind of the scale, right? Our typical approach is you say it's either this or this. Let's weigh the pros and cons of each and let's make a trade-off. The problem with either or thinking, it's really twofold. One is it's extremely limiting. Are we really just constrained to two choices? Furthermore, if we are limiting ourselves to those choices, over time, we will tend to continuously gravitate toward our preferred or more comfortable side. But what we found in this study is that there's a better way. And in our work, we started to shift our own mindsets, our work with other leaders, to really think about paradox. And how do we move from viewing these tensions, this tug of war that we feel in so many spheres of our lives and our professional work, to a both and. And when you think of a paradox, we often turn to the symbol of yin yang, as you can see on this slide. I mean, the beauty of the yin yang is that you have two opposing slivers, but they're actually defining each other. They work together. We need these contradictions, but we also come to realize that they're interdependent, that they're connected, and they don't go away. We may make a decision today about, are we going to be focused on the short term versus the long term, but we're going to have to make it again. Likewise, when we really start to think about some of the tensions that we find with the remarkable women leaders that we work with, we can see some very particular tensions that we hear again and again. So you can see some of them here. But for example, should I be really focused on my competence, demonstrating my capabilities, my skills, my expertise? And how do I be a compassionate leader? Focus on the culture. Think about the people that I work with. Bring care to the situation. Develop psychological safety. When we think about these types of tensions as paradoxes, we see that we need both. In fact, they work together in really powerful ways that open new possibilities. Certainly, this goes beyond the compassion and competence to, are we collaborative and competing? Can we focus on our work and make sure our lives are going well outside of our professional selves? Think about ourselves and others. These different tensions make up so much of the challenges and beauties of being women leaders.
And I'm just monitoring the chat. As Dafina just said, our colleague at the Women's Leadership Initiative, the core idea here is that we all face tensions. It's not if we face them, but how. But how. And one of the reasons that we wrote this book was in part when we both first started out studying the notion of paradox and living in the both and. The word paradox felt very foreign to people. The notion of both and felt very foreign to people. And we had to convince people that there was value in moving away from our linear, either or, very reductionist thinking into a more holistic both and thinking. It just seems irrational to us. And yet what we found over the last 20, 25 years is that not only have people started to engage with this idea of both and, we're using the language everywhere. And in fact, we're starting to use this language of paradox everywhere. We see, not only do Marianne and I see them everywhere, we see that the language shows that people are seeing them everywhere. Paradoxes of leadership and certainly paradoxes of women's leadership. And we have had the pleasure of being in a growing academic community where we and our colleagues have been doing significant research around this. And so the core idea that we were hoping to convey in this book is, how do we move beyond the label of both and, move beyond the label of paradox, and really effectively navigate these tensions? I'm sharing this in parts maybe as a bit of a teaser to what you can engage with the book, but the core idea in the book is that we engage, there's different sets of tools that we use to effectively engage tensions. And I'll tell you, Marianne and I spent quite some time trying to get those tools into labels that easily are A, B, C, D, but very quickly our assumptions is how we think about, frame our tensions and reframe them from an either or to a both and. Jumping over to the other side, our comfort is how we feel about tensions. So it's how we think about them and also how we feel about them. One of the things that we've experienced in our own work and in working with others is just how challenging these tug of wars feel and how we can get caught up in them, and the need to let go, or to say it differently, to honor the discomfort, but not let it drive our actions. If we go to the top and the bottom, so those are both about where we are as individuals. The top and bottom are about the context we create around ourselves, the structures or the scaffolding, we like to say, that we create around ourselves to navigate competing demands in a both and way. Boundaries are about things like setting a higher vision longer term, so we don't get so enmeshed in the tension at the moment, but we're able to look out to, so if you're ever in a either or right wrong conflict with someone, you know that you can get really tied up in the specifics of the moment, and you can find ways to find a more holistic, integrative possibility with other people when you look out to the long-term horizon. And then dynamics is about the fact that we're constantly shifting when we navigate tensions. We're constantly moving and changing when we navigate tensions. Again, I'll leave that there maybe as a teaser to what the book has to offer, because what we really want to do is jump into our panel and maybe say one more quick idea, which is that what we find is that while navigating paradox, living in paradox, honoring both and is a lifetime of practice. It's something we're constantly even reminding ourselves and each other in this work. The starting point is about changing the question. As my colleagues know, I'm sure Marianne's colleagues know too, that whenever we hear an either or question, we will pause and say, what's the both and? And in part, we love this idea from Paul Watzlawick, that it's about how do we reframe our tensions, or said differently, the framing of our tensions matters in terms of how we navigate them. So it's not that tensions are a bad thing, it's how we navigate them. And the first entree into shifting how we navigate them is about changing the question. Watzlawick, his quote was, "The problem is not the problem is the way that we think about the problem." And so our goal for today is to explore with 4 amazing female leaders that have been in incredible roles, both as leaders, as board members, thinking about women's leadership in management, women's leadership in the boardroom, and how reframing some of the tensions and trade-offs that we feel as female leaders that feel like they're a tug of war can shift us into the both and, shift us into thinking about using the both and to shift us into thinking about possibilities and opportunities rather than obstacles and problems. And so I want to invite our 4 amazing panelists to come and join us. Again, we are so thrilled to have 2 alums from University of Cincinnati, 2 alums from University of Delaware here joining us. Susan Alexander, Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute Fellow and the former Chief Human Resources Officer at Sotheby's. Liza Bartell, Senior Counsel for Board of Manufacturing and Delaware Manufacturing Association. Ashley Carlisle, Data and Platforms Accountant at Google currently, previously at Hershey's, and Vita Richardson, President and CEO of the Association of Corporate Counsel and a member of the Weinberg Board of Governors. So, the Weinberg Center Board of Governors. So I want to invite you all to open up your videos and welcome you all here.
Hello.
Wonderful. It's so good to have everyone here. You know, both and thinking applies to our personal tensions as well as our leadership tensions. So we thought we would start by exploring some of our tensions at a more individual level, those that have arisen and that you've navigated in your career. So Ashley, if I may start with you, I know you've experienced the tension between being bold and speaking up when feeling wronged in the workplace and not wanting to offend, especially people more senior. You and I have discussed this over time, and I think a lot of people grapple with that tension. But you found a way to be bold and not to offend, but rather to create an ally. I'd love you to share that story if you would.
Absolutely. I'd also like to just frame it in some context, a little bit about me. Hello, everyone. I am a proud graduate of the University of Cincinnati, but also a proud first generation graduate. So that means a lot of things. And it's super related to navigating the workplace when you often feel as though you are a pioneer. And so it adds an extra level of weight, of responsibility, where you feel like you're walking through these doors for the first time. And not only am I representing myself, I feel like I'm representing my mother, who sacrificed a lot for me to be here. I'm representing my race, because a lot of times I feel as though I'm the first or only or different at the table. And so if you think about that, and I just wanted to take 30 seconds to set you in that context. As a woman leader, sometimes fear and doubt can creep in, even when you meet injustice in the professional realm, right? Because you're thinking, am I going to sacrifice my livelihood? So a little bit more about the story that Marianne and I spoke about has to do with finding my voice in the workplace and addressing a situation where I felt like I was not being acknowledged for the work that I was bringing. And just a small thing, I just remember so distinctly getting to work at 9 a.m., logging in, like we had a little bit of a relaxed culture to start a little later. and seeing an email come through from my senior leader say, like, bragging about my manager and this innovative work and how it went to the board. And I said, wait a minute. Felt this knot in my stomach at work, tension. I had to quickly get up from my desk, take a walk outside because I felt the heat on my face. I was so angry. How could this new manager who had just gotten here take, credit, or even not even acknowledge the senior leader? Hey, this person, Ashley, it was her idea. This was her baby. I felt as though it was my baby. How could he? How dare he? And taking a step back, in that tension that I felt, I was going home every night feeling sick to my stomach, not wanting to eat. Like, that is how angry and disturbed I felt, because I felt like it was a huge injustice. It was glaringly obvious that I had been building this for the longest. However, I felt like I didn't want to say anything at work. I always knew that this person was my manager at the time, was talking over me in meetings. And then finally, I had gotten to this crossroads, right? Because I realized I had been placing him into this category of an adversary versus an advocate, right? And that was the pivot that happened. And the way that I had met this intersection was actually through having a truth teller in my life. Like, I had someone who loved me, cared for me, knew all the intricacies about me. And the truth teller sat and said, hey, you have to honor yourself. And then they actually highlighted the story in a parable, a Hindu parable, about being like an archer and focusing on the target and not worrying about if the target moves or the surrounding war that is going on around you, but focus on landing the message in your target. How are you going to address it? So I'll make a long story short, is I did take action to address it, but it wasn't in one foul swoop. It was in micro movements, micro behaviors. And a long story short, he ended up becoming an advocate. He pivoted from being my adversary to now one of my biggest advocates. And because I had addressed it in an authentic, thoughtful way, I had begun with assuming positive intent. Even though I didn't want to, I'm like, this is so obvious. Like, why do I have to assume positive intent? But really, that's really for your own benefit. That's to free your mind so that you have all the faculties of the brilliance that is you to address the situation, because you're not so focused on this is an or situation. And then I'd say, like, the last thing that won him over as an advocate is I wrote out my vision. I showed my swim lanes. I also shared up, right? I didn't complain up, but I got a very senior champion, different from an advocate. This is a champion. So I felt already that my voice was heard, regardless if this person would act on my feedback. But the person was like, wow, I didn't even realize I was doing that. That was the craziest thing to me. I had to laugh in the meeting. And it didn't mean it in a disrespectful way, but I'm like, oh, he's like, I didn't even realize, oh, well, what do you need from me? How can I help? I said, I want to build my brand. I want more visibility. Then he started open doors for external speaking engagements. He began fighting on my behalf. And then post me leaving the company I was at, he actually was a huge, huge champion and advocate for me getting into Google. Right. So that really set me on a launch path, because before I would sit in meetings in general, even before this manager, and have like a quiet strength about myself. But in reality, there was a fiery heat that was taking place where I had to eventually step over into action.
Well, thank you, Ashley. I mean, that's such a powerful story. And I think it's a wonderful example of, in those crossroads, we have so many choices. And your example of both managing your emotions, but also we call it tightrope walking. I mean, thinking about these micro shifts rather than going in either paralyzed or so strong that you kind of burn the relationships as you go is a tremendous example of both and thinking. You know, Susan, we've talked about this as well, because certainly you've navigated tensions throughout your career, but authenticity has been a big one that we've discussed. We're wanting to fit in, to be part of the organization, part of the leadership team, yet also be true to yourself. And I think you found interesting ways to navigate the both and. Could you share your story?
Sure. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So I'm taking you back in time to 1976, when I had a summer internship after my first year of my MBA at UC. And I had so many fabulous experiences there as I traveled through the organization. And at the end of the summer, all of the interns were supposed to make a presentation about their experience. So I naively assumed they really wanted to hear what I had to say. So on the big day, my fellow interns made their presentations, and they were followed by applause and engaged conversation. So I was pretty buoyant. I was last on the agenda as I stepped up and expressed my gratitude for this incredible opportunity to integrate my training as a musician with my new education in the business school, and for the first time apply it in some kind of practical setting. And I explained that my music experience had provided a unique lens through which I could process all of these experiences at GM. And I wanted to share this so they could see this through my eyes, through the eyes of a musician. So I projected the music for a Bach fugue on the wall, and I explained the 4 different voices, each knowing its role, when to be dominant, when to collaborate, when to support, when to be silent. And then I asked them to try to hear each voice as I played that piece. Yeah, you heard me. I played my violin at General Motors. And then I projected another piece on the wall, Paganini Caprice, and explained that this was a virtuoso piece often played as an encore after a performance to show off and show my technical prowess. And I wanted them to hear what that sounded like. So I went on to explain that over the course of the summer, I had observed these same behaviors at work, at General Motors. I saw people working in concert effectively as a team. I saw people grandstanding and looking for the limelight. And I saw all kinds of variations in between. And I described the skills that I'd honed as a musician: analysis, interpretation, focus, individual excellence, discipline, listening, teamwork. And I was increasingly seeing the application of these in the work environment. So this kind of integrative thinking seemed to be really unusual at General Motors. And that made sense because most of the people there looked alike, and they'd actually been trained alike. Most of them had graduated from General Motors Institute. So I suggested that diversifying their staff could prepare them for the inevitable demographic shifts in their customer base, and combining input from different disciplines, from different lived experiences, different sexes, races, cultures could only strengthen their decision-making and their design process. Would cars designed and marketed by white men appeal to increasingly diverse customers? Could GM's success continue if they were not preparing for a different future? Could their culture even embrace the value that new faces and new voices could bring? These were the questions at the top of my mind at the end of my summer. So I ended with profuse thanks for this opportunity and such an enriching experience. No one clapped. And there were no questions. And everyone silently filed out of the conference room. And I was left wondering, what had I done? The other interns stopped by my desk later that afternoon offering condolences. They thought I was crazy. And clearly I was never going to get a job offer from General Motors after this stunt. And then something really unexpected happened. The next week, my phone started ringing. And every person at that meeting invited me to breakfast, to coffee, to lunch. And at first I thought they must just be feeling sorry for me. But these discussions took an unexpectedly personal turn. And people shared their career highlights and their disappointments, the challenges, balancing their personal and their professional lives. And although none had been comfortable even acknowledging anything in my presentation, much less sharing any kind of private thoughts, somehow that presentation opened a door for introspection and self-reflection. Then I was sent on the corporate jet to the company headquarters to meet all the top brass. And my head was reeling. Like, was this really a success after all? Like, was it okay to be my authentic self? This messy combination of both and thinking, this musician and this business person. So on my last day, my boss asked me to stop by his office. And, I was so worried that I had somehow compromised him by allowing me to make this crazy presentation. And he said he wanted me to make a promise. And I said, anything, I'll promise anything. This was such a marvelous opportunity. And he said, promise me you will never work for General Motors. I was stunned. Like, I clearly had misinterpreted absolutely everything. And he saw my confusion and my distress and said, no, wait, you don't understand. I need to explain. You will get job offers from General Motors, but you don't belong here. This place will crush you. There is one way at General Motors, and that is the GM way. And you need to find somewhere where your gifts will be appreciated, where you can thrive and bring your whole self to work. And that place is definitely not GM. It was the best advice I ever got. And I finally found my place at Sotheby's, where I spent over 30 years building a high-performing collaborative culture of passionate, quirky colleagues from 40 different countries. And that advice also really defined my life's purpose, which is helping others navigate towards those opportunities and experiences that'll help them flourish personally and professionally. So I've found that life is much more interesting if we can avoid boxing ourselves into the either or scenarios and embrace the liminality in our lives, both and thinking. Unexpected solutions emerge, and that's when the real magic can happen.
Oh, thank you, Susan. I think that's a remarkable example just for us to hold as well when we think about you don't know what you don't know and what could come out of these remarkable moments of creative friction, but that you made possible by putting yourself out there in that way. Thank you.
Susan, I just want to highlight the chat is blowing up with goosebumps. Ashley and Susan, both of your stories really resonated with so many people online. I just want to remind you all, we have several hundred, I think we're almost up to 300 people online here with us. And we would love, please join us in the chat, join these conversations as you resonate with these ideas. And as these ideas really resonate with your own tensions, Susan, I just want to reflect that one of the things that we think a lot about is in the context of change, in the context of making a difference, in the context of the work that we do, there's the question of, is this about sort of the individual, what we can bring to the table as individuals, as women, as people, and is it about the context? And, that unto itself is its own false dichotomy, either or, that it's about the individual resonating with the context. And your story, you brought your authentic self, and your story reminded us how the importance of having the context that reinforces the ways in which our individual self can be most powerful. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to turn one of the things that Marianne and I experience in this work about both and is that it informs and enables our individual experiences. It enables us to be more powerful in our individual decisions, our individual choices, whether at work, as Ashley, Susan, you both shared with us, or in our individual lives. And it informs how we as leaders navigate the more corporate challenges, navigate our strategic challenges along the way. And I want to turn Liza and Vita to some of your stories. It turns out that where Marianne and I both started, each of us in this work, was around the tensions that we feel about innovation, creativity, change, and the tension between trying to enable things to change while holding on to the things that we love that are stable, and that tension between today and tomorrow, innovation, change, and stability, the existing world. And Liza, I want to just turn to you first, because that was a challenge that you faced in your leadership, and invite you to share a little bit about that and how you navigated that, and in part how bringing your authentic self, your female authentic self, helped you to navigate that in a way that enabled you to move past some real tensions and real resistance.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning, everybody. Glad to be with you. You're right. I had a situation that I think is a great one to share here. The company I work for a long time is Agilent Technologies, a spinoff of Hewlett-Packard. And I was a manufacturing manager, and we had multiple manufacturing sites, and everybody was producing their own products and shipping them directly to the customers. Our customers weren't very happy about that, in that our customers needed the products to come all at the same time, because many of the factories were making things that went together. So think about it for you. These are technical products like gas chromatographs, but think about it in terms of your PC. You have a laptop, maybe a monitor, maybe a keyboard, a separate keyboard, maybe a printer, makes a system. And it doesn't work unless all the components are there together. And so you might receive maybe you ordered the whole thing at one time, but you might receive the monitor and then you get the printer, but you still can't make it work until it's all there and you have the PC and you hook it all up. And so that's what was happening to our customers. They would get the one item from one factory, the other maybe 2 weeks later from a different factory. And so what was happening is they were ending up with boxes sitting in their hallways waiting for everything to show up before they could make a system that would actually work in their laboratory. But the team that I was leading was very happy with where they were. They liked the fact that they had control. They were building the product, they were shipping it out to the customer, and they could invoice the customer at that time. So they were pleased with where they were and didn't really want to change. Very decentralized, loved that, and so wanted the control they had and keep it the way it was. But in the back of my mind, I'm hearing the customer's not happy. The customer's not happy. That's not good for our business. And so as we started to talk about it as a team, my team was very deeply rooted in, I like it just the way it is. And so I was trying to figure out, what could we do? I had one member of the team who had a diverse background and came from a particular program that had some logistics background, and also a different culture. And he came up with this idea about and today it seems obvious, but a logistics center where we would merge together the products. So everybody at the manufacturing sites would ship their products to these logistics centers, and then they would send them out all at once. So the customer got everything at one time. The team was very negative about it. And, people said, no, we can't do that. There was quite a bit of rejection of the idea. And I had been to some training in the past where I'd been reminded that when every single bone in your body says, we've done that, we've been there, we don't like it, we don't want to do it, as a leader, the thing that you should do is say, tell me more. Ask a question and get the person to tell you more. And so I did that, and I said, tell me more about how this is going to work, because I could hear everybody saying it's not going to work, it's not going to work. So I gave this person the time to be able to talk about how they envisioned it working. And so by getting those ideas out, we had, again, a lot of rejection. And I just kept saying, I need to know more. Tell me more. How would you respond to the complaint that people are having about it not working? And what ended up happening, sort of condense it a little bit, what ended up happening is we came up with a real both and solution, which was for those products that went to customers as a solution where they needed everything to come together, they would go to a logistics center. So we actually set up a logistics center and factories shipped to that logistics center. But there were products that customers didn't have to have merged with other things that could ship direct from a factory, and the customer would be very happy with it. And so things like, think about like a vial and a laboratory, you put a sample in a vial. They don't need those to go with a solution. They use them all the time. So just ship them direct to them. So we had a solution that ended up being a both and solution, which was really about have the factories that needed to merge their products, get them merged in a logistics center so the customers were happy. This customer satisfaction ratings went up substantially after that. And they were very, very happy with getting everything at one time, because then they could schedule an installation and a technical person to come help them set up the item in their laboratory. So I think the key thing for us was, in my thinking back over it, is at first I was so with the rest of the group about, we don't need to change anything. Everything's fine. We like it just the way it is. But realizing that, one, if you put the customers first, it will make you think we need to change. And secondly, how you go about doing that is getting a diverse group of people together who have different ideas and giving room for those people to speak. And if you don't give room to them, you will continue down the path that you always are in. So it's about hiring people of diverse backgrounds. It's about giving those people the opportunity to speak and to listen to their ideas by generating more questions, asking them to tell you more, even when you say in your heart of hearts you don't think it's going to work. Let them tell you more, because many times it will work.
Liza, so I have goosebumps in listening to that story. If anybody popped out of the webinar mentally for a minute, I want to invite you to just pop back in for a minute and hear those words, tell me more, and the power of them. And the last sentence that you just said, because when we've been talking about this notion of both and thinking, a big piece that comes up is the conflicts that happen across people who have different points of view. So we espouse diversity and different points of view, and yet we go into these conversations sort of dukes up, ready to reject other people's points of view and positions. And we see that at the individual level with our personal relationships. We see that at the organizational level with people with different points of view about the strategy. We see that in terms of political polarization, and the value of just pausing to listen to somebody who's different than you. And you don't have to agree. You just have to start by inviting in the conversation is so powerful. So Liza, thank you for putting that on the table in terms of the value of doing that toward both and thinking. Vita, you had a similar story. Yes. Vita, before I invite you to tell your story, I just want to say it's so nice to be back on a webinar with you. You and I were on a webinar together when your book came out, and I'm going to try quickly to put your book into the chat so that people can take a look at your book, Take 6, which is about your leadership journey and what you learned along the way with some powerful lessons. And one of the lessons was learning how to navigate organizational change and the tensions that came up there. So I will turn it over to you for that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to congratulate you and Marianne on your book. I've certainly learned a lot from review of it, especially your chapter 6, which is all about finding comfort in the discomfort. That's one that, I intend to circulate amongst my team. We have experienced organizational tension around change. And let me back up and say that I am ACC's president and CEO and have been in the job about 11 years. When I took over, the organization was appointed. The organization had been founded in 1982, so it had been around for a little more than 30 years when I took the helm. And like Ashley, so many lessons from our other fantastic panelists. Like Ashley, I came into the organization as a first. I was the first minority person of color ever in their management structure. For 30 years, ever in the management structure in a profession where minority women are very much an underrepresented group. So coming into that organization, also being tasked with the big challenge, at the time, ACC was largely known as the American Corporate Counsel Association. And as I became CEO, the board had set a big vision that our association needed to go global. But coming into it, after having my previous position been looking at organizations, thinking about some of the things that Susan and Liza have talked about in terms of the importance of diversity, coming into the organization, it was clear that the organization was not well equipped to make the turn to be global. And that's because of how they went about hiring. It was largely an organization that hired by recommendations of people on staff. So if you don't have global perspectives or lots of diversity on your staff, and that's your referral network for bringing new talent in, diversity is going to fail. So we had to look at how we reapproach talent and recruiting talent. We had to think about diversifying our board of directors. In order to go global, you can't just have lawyers who practice law in the United States. You need to reach across continents even. So we needed to really re-engineer how we look at leadership. We also had to think about doing some training within our team, because it wasn't either we will be US focused or we will be globally focused. We had to be both US focused because that was the corpus of our membership, and we needed to be adding that global perspective as well. And so in brief, that's the change that I needed to navigate, and found that as we diversified staff, our leadership, and invested in that multicultural training for those who had been previously very US-centric, we were really able to make significant inroads where we went from a very small sector of our membership residing and working and being outside of North America to now 27% of our membership is from outside of North America and growing. And we've also found that it has enabled us to attract more companies that do business multinationally. And now 60% of our membership is, comprised of multinational companies. So it really was about honoring who we were and making that transition to be able to serve globally.
I love that. And embedded in that is this tension between tradition, what we love and want to bring with us, and modernization, change. And it's not either or there either. It's the same with us as individuals. People talk about being authentic. And, Susan, you had talked about being authentic. And yet our authenticity, there's a paradox there because we also want to grow and change. And so there's this tension between who we are and who we change into. And those are so powerful. I just want to highlight, Vita, in the chat, one of your ACC members, Kara, is giving you a shout out for the organization. You've got some shout outs there. So Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah.
Well, and we've got some really good questions coming. Before we turn to those questions, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to really ask the panelists, especially because we have a number of rising leaders on this webinar. What tip would you provide, would you offer the rising leader? And let's be fair, we're all rising, whatever our stage of leadership. What would be your encouragement, your suggestion? How about maybe we'll start in the same order. Ashley, you want to kick us off?
I get so excited when I get the chance to speak to rising leaders or if you're finding your journey, regardless of where you are. I love that question. Thank you for that question. And thank you all to the panelists, because I just feel so inspired and honored. It was just almost like another set of fuel, a refilling of my tank as I go forward in my career. So I want to start by this, imagine you have a girl from Cincinnati, born of a single parent. And now I'm leading tech, selling tech solutions. This is the result of these three things that I want rising leaders to take away here. Number one, lean into that creative tension. I love how the book frames it, calls it creative, because it almost is a juxtaposition. Like, I hate that word tension, but listen, you can't even start a fire without tension. You know, you're gonna have to strike a match. And that fire, once you lean into that heat, I remember I said assume positive intent, but I didn't say forget who you are, forget your emotions. Validate that you are angry, that there was an injustice, because the quicker that you can move through those emotions, the more you get access to the faculties that exist in your mind and to drive creative solutions. So that's number one, is lean into that heat, allow that tension to build. Because again, I spoke about going from adversary to advocate. Yeah, I felt like this was my very real. My truth was, this was my adversary. This is a white male. He's just coming over. You know, that is true. And then it released me to start to think of, how is this? How am I wrong in this? Like, what is the other side of this? And it created two things that happened. I found my voice in the corporate world. I started speaking up in meetings. I kind of said, hey, I just said that, you know, I just want to be clear, but maybe doing it with humor. I found my authentic voice, and I built an advocate and a lifelong friend, like in this person who was my adversary. And then I'll say the last two is lift as you climb. Lift as you climb, because whatever learning that you unlock after you start reverse engineering, how do you democratize that information? And Marianne, you know, we started, like, there's a scholarship that we started for Black business students in the University of Cincinnati. Like, that is, I'm not 100% wealthy, but I think it's important to democratize opportunities and share what I've learned to others, to ensure that we diversify the world of business. And I'd say lastly is, all battles, 100% of the battles start in the mind. They start in the mind. So do not underestimate the power of moving through your emotions, writing down your emotions, putting together a game plan, and being in isolation for a minute until you develop your approach, right, to shifting the atmosphere or shifting the story. So that's what I want to leave leaders with.
Thank you, Ashley. I think those are treasured insights. Susan, can I shift to you? Thank you.
Well, first, I think Ashley's got a career as a motivational speaker. I don't think I can compete with that. But, you know, when I think about authenticity, and it has been central to my life and career, because I grew up in a little town in Indiana, and then wound up working all over the world with people from all different kinds of cultures. You also have a responsibility to be authentic. You can't expect organizations or colleagues to read your mind. They don't know these unique, crazy experiences and talents that you bring. So you have the responsibility to somehow translate those and operationalize those. So organizations have a fighting chance to embrace those and help you be a whole person at work. So, you know, I've done 40 years of HR. I've hired people, I've trained and developed people, and it's pretty clear when somebody is being authentic and when they aren't. And I can tell you, it's the authentic people that really thrive over time. So be true to yourself, but accept the responsibility that goes along with that.
Thank you, Susan. Liza, Tim.
Yeah, I would say it starts for me at hiring. So many times companies hire people that they think are like them. And so, you know, you like somebody, you meet them and you talk to them and so forth, and you say, gee, I get along with this person. I think they're a good fit. And that term good fit drives me crazy, because it is a indication that you're trying to hire people just like you. And so for me, the key is hiring people, and this is true from the first hire into the company as well as hiring people for your team. I would say your success is dependent upon how good your team is and how diverse your team is. And I mean that from background standpoint, you know, sex, race, culture, but also skill set, education, all of those things matter. And surrounding yourself with people as best as you can on your team who are different will cause tension. It won't be, all happy smiles and everybody kumbaya, but it will get you better outcomes because your success is dependent upon how good your team is. And so you want that team to be made up of a variety of people with different ideas. And then, as I said before, you have to then listen to those ideas and give everybody an opportunity to bring those ideas forward. Because it would be a crime if you hire people who are different than you and then you squash them all the time and say, no, they're going to leave for sure. So hire really good people, but then also make sure they're all different so that you can actually use all those good ideas to get to more success.
I love that, Liza. Really empowering the diversity that you bring and the authenticity. Veda?
Yeah, I would say that what I've learned, especially during this pandemic and leading and being CEO during the Great Resignation, one of the things we're proud of is that ACC has been able to keep its turnover at well less than what our association peers are experiencing. And I believe that is because, and you talk about it in the book about letting your heart do the talking. So I believe that today, as a leader, you must be authentic. And secondly, you must be comfortable leading, managing, and working with diverse teams. And to the extent leaders haven't developed that skill, they need to lean in and quickly develop it, because that's the skill that most enables you to allow a workforce to feel that you are invested in them. So one of the things that we've done, at ACC is in leading and listening, we survey our employees more. And we demonstrate when we as management talk about the changes that are going to come and what changes we're going to be making in our workplace. We demonstrate this is what we heard from you. This is what we're going to do. If what we're doing differs from, what the population may have suggested, we're explaining why. And explaining why we believe that it's in the organization's best interest, but as well as the employee. And I close by saying, I also think leaders need to have the ability to look at talent differently. Because sometimes people don't raise their hand to try doing something different. And so as leaders, sometimes we need to see the possibilities in terms of ways that people who are employed by us might serve in a new capacity. Different capacity. Thanks.
I'll just jump in and say, I know that in the chat, we're hearing people say how inspired they are. Ashley, I also appreciate your comment. I feel so deeply inspired. Marianne and I have talked about, with this new book out, what's next? It's always good to look at. And we've often questioned whether next for us in terms of a project is the paradoxes of women's leadership and how to navigate. This conversation is so rich in tips and tricks from all of you, having been there on the front lines, having navigated these tensions. We have a couple minutes left, and one of the pieces that has come up again and again in the chat is the tension of diversity and navigating diversity. Again, Liza, as you said, diversity of all kinds. Our friend Monica Iboda, Monica, I'll quote you here, went back to your comment, Susan, and just pointing out what a pioneer you were in authenticity in the workplace in the 1970s, and how that wasn't really even a thing then. And yet we're still grappling with that today, which is enabling women, enabling people of color, enabling women of color to be their authentic self in the workplace. What does that look like from a leadership point of view? And what does that look like from a personal point of view? You all touched on that in some different ways, but I'm wondering if we can double down on that topic for some tips around that very briefly, because we only have just a couple minutes left. And I'll invite any of you that want to pop in. And again, just for your maybe 2 sentences on this.
Well, I'll jump in that our workforce is global. And so we're very mindful about, how we schedule meetings, although the majority of the team might be based in the US. My favorite meeting is our global staff meeting, where we hold it late in the day in the US.
Okay.
And then it's midday or mid-evening for those who are in Brussels, and in Australia, they're having coffee. So it's kind of like the contrast between coffee in one region of the world and cocktails in the other that will serve to kind of get people to mingle and have a chance to get together.
I would say empathy is always a good thing.
Susan, can you say one more sentence
Definitely.
about that? Because that is powerful. And somebody in the chat should write that down. So empathy is always a good thing. Say one more sentence about what you mean by that.
Well, I've had to do some very difficult things throughout my career. And when I have done them with authenticity and empathy, it's always worked. I have remained very close friends with people that I had to fire. I've had to close organizations. I've had to restructure things. My boss was convicted of a felony. When you deal with people authentically and with empathy, they understand.
You're right. It's what they said. Let the heart do the talking.
Yeah. Assume positive intent. Ashley, Liza, we have about 1 minute. Any quick thoughts about that from either of you?
I mean, I could certainly jump in real quick and say, I think that you need to care about the people that you work with, and even if they're very different from you. So maybe empathy and caring are sort of the same thing. But I feel like if you care about the individuals, you will do the right things for them, even in bad situations, or as Susan described, horrible things you have to do.
Love it. Ashley, any last words?
Yeah, I think finally, the biggest learning I've garnered these past couple of years is perspective, and that two things can be true at the same time. And understanding that is like the start of any conversation. And number two, I would say, is like, if this is important, then it should cost us collectively something. Cost us our time, cost us our intelligence, like dedicating time toward it, and or the company, monetary investment, right? Like this is not a one and done conversation. This is an ongoing, evolving thing to achieve what we all universally believe is the right thing to do.
Brilliant. Well, don't hop off yet if you are closing out with us, because in the next 1 minute, we're going to raffle off one of our books for one of you, and we want you to be around. And I just saw in the chat, Leila Campoli, who is here with us. So Leila, thank you. Leila is our agent who has helped us get this book into the hands of so many people. Leila, thank you for being with us. And thank you all for being with us with this powerful conversation. Thank you, Vida and Susan and Ashley and Liza, for such powerful ideas. I am just going to end with one of Marianne and my favorite quotes. The thinker without paradox is like a lover without feeling, a paltry mediocrity. We are so inspired to share the ideas in this book because of the powerful ways in which they inform the leadership and the lives of people. And you all have been such a remarkable testament to that. And so
Thank you.
I am getting a text from Defina Jabade saying, Esther Naranjo, you are the lucky raffalee of the book. If you can send us in the chat or by email your address, we will share a book with you. It's 10 o'clock, so I will say thank you to our panelists and thank you to all of you for being here, and turn it over to Marianne to close us out with a.
Thank you again. Thank you for your inspiration. Whatever coast you're on, this is a wonderful part of your day. I hope that you found it as tank filling, to use Ashley's words, as we did. It's been such an honor. All the best, everyone, as you navigate your tensions. Thank you.